Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating business case study. It's about a company that looked at a broken industry and didn't just try to patch it up. They redesigned its entire architecture from the ground up. This is all about how to build a franchise that's meant to scale by fixing the very structure of the system itself.
Okay, so let's start with a question. A paradox, really. You've got this market for business leads, especially in high-stakes industries like insurance. Now, you have massive demand from buyers who desperately need customers, and on the other side, a huge global supply of call centers that can generate those leads. So, why does this market constantly break down? Why do so many of these companies end up failing? And this quote right here, it gets to the absolute heart of the matter. It turns out it's not about working harder or hiring better agents. The problem is literally baked into the system. The most important jobs, making the leads, selling them, staying legal, and getting paid, are all in direct conflict with each other. It creates a model that is practically designed to implode. So here's our game plan for today. We're going to start by looking at this broken market and really unpack the 4 key failures. Then we'll introduce a totally new operating system designed to fix it. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of how the model works, see why it's not your typical franchise, and then wrap it all up with the big takeaway. All right, let's start with that paradox. A market that is just overflowing with opportunity, yet it's completely plagued by systemic failure. It's one of those classic cases of something that looks great on paper, but just completely collapses under real-world pressure. And this right here, this visualizes the chaos perfectly. On the left, you've got this one single operator who's trying to be a producer, a salesperson, a lawyer, and a debt collector all at the same time. I mean, think about it. How can you objectively manage quality assurance when your own paycheck depends on selling as many leads as possible, good or bad? You can't. So the result over on the right is exactly what you'd expect. Massive conflicts of interest, huge systemic risk, and a system that is absolutely guaranteed to break the second you try to grow. Okay, so let's get a little more specific. This tangled mess of jobs doesn't just create chaos, it leads to 4 very distinct, catastrophic failures that all come together to create a perfect storm. First up is payment risk. Just imagine this for a second. You've generated thousands of leads, you've paid all your staff for the week, and then your main buyer just decides not to pay you on time. Or worse, they refuse to pay at all, claiming the quality was bad. For a producer, this isn't just an inconvenience, it's an existential threat that makes your cash flow a nightmare and any kind of planning basically impossible. Second, and this one's a biggie, is compliance exposure. The regulations around contacting consumers, things at the TCPA, are incredibly strict and come with absolutely massive penalties. But in the traditional model, compliance is often just an afterthought, left up to each individual producer. This creates a ticking time bomb. One little mistake can get you shut down and expose the entire supply chain to crippling legal action. Third is buyer dependency. So many of these producers are completely at the mercy of 1 or 2 big clients. Well, what happens if that one big buyer gets a new CEO or decides to change their budget or just has a bad quarter? The producer's business can be wiped out, literally overnight. It's the very definition of a fragile business. And finally, there's a total lack of standardization. When every single producer has their own scripts, their own process, their own definition of what a good lead even is, buyers get wildly inconsistent results. And what does that do? It destroys trust. Buyers can't rely on the supply, so they can never build the kind of long-term, scalable partnerships they need. So how in the world do you fix a system that has these 4 gigantic fundamental failures? Well, you don't just try to manage the chaos better. You have to change the entire operating system. And that whole change starts with one really powerful insight. The whole solution is built on this idea of a separation of powers, just like you'd see in government. It's a brilliant move. You identify the jobs that are in conflict with each other and you pull them apart. You centralize the stuff that creates system-wide risk, like negotiating sales and managing compliance, and you decentralize the things that thrive on local speed and execution, like, actually producing the leads. So what does this separation of powers actually look like in practice? Well, it's a 2-layer system that creates something incredibly powerful, a risk firewall. Let's break that down. This table just lays out the entire model perfectly. Okay, so on the left, you've got the franchisee. Their job is clear and focused, operational excellence. That's it. Hire good people, manage them well, run a tight ship, and execute the playbook. Then, over on the right, you have this central platform, TCL. They handle everything else. All the messy stuff. They do the buyer contracts, the pricing, they define compliance, they handle quality assurance, and, this is crucial, they collect the money. The franchisee focuses on making the product, the platform focuses on selling it and protecting the entire system. And this clear separation is what creates that risk firewall. All those huge systemic risks we talked about before, buyers not paying, complex compliance rules, pricing wars, they now hit the central platform and get absorbed there. It acts like a shield, and it allows the franchisee to just focus on their work with a level of stability and peace of mind that is simply impossible in the old, broken model. Now, when you hear the word franchise, you probably have a pretty clear picture in your head, right? A fast food joint, maybe a coffee shop. But this system is fundamentally different. It completely breaks the mold. Let's dig into why. This really highlights the night and day difference. A typical franchise, they make their money up front by charging you huge fees for a territory and handing you a binder, a static playbook, and then they outsource all the real risk to you. The TCL model does the exact opposite. It doesn't charge big entry fees, it makes money on a revenue share, which means it only wins when the franchisee wins. It absorbs the big systemic risks instead of pushing them down, and it provides a live, breathing operating system, not some dusty book, that scales through disciplined governance, not just by selling more dots on a map. And this all means that the model is built for a very specific type of person. This is not for passive investors who are just looking to park some cash and check in once a month. No, it's designed for true operators, people who are obsessed with execution, with managing a team, and with running a really tight ship. So after looking at this broken system and this really innovative solution, what's the big lesson? What's the main thing we can pull from all this? Well, it really all boils down to one thing: the incredible power of structural design. It really comes down to these core principles. First, tie your success to your partner's performance. Second, build the rules for good governance before you start chasing massive volume. Third, take on the risks that your operators can't control so they can focus on what they can control. Fourth, scale systems and institutions, because individual relationships just don't scale reliably. And finally, and this is the most important lesson of all, your structure isn't just some small detail. It fundamentally determines your outcome. This leaves us with one last thought to chew on. This case study was all about lead generation, but this principle is universal. So ask yourself, what other industries do you see out there that are just full of smart, hardworking people, but are constantly failing or in chaos? Maybe the problem isn't the players at all. Maybe the game itself is just badly designed.